Hello, friends. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to the Michelle Fondin Author vlog. This is episode number 39, and today I'm going to talk about when I was starving for love. This is a true story about my life and how I was in this constant state of starving for love, how I recognized it, and how I overcame that desperate state. Hi, I am the author of 14 published books, in case you don't know who I am, including my latest books, Love Me Unconditionally, a spiritual guide to self-love and inner peace, and the companion workbook to go along with it so you can work through your self-love work. And guess what? You can now get on the wait list for my self-love mastery online course that's happening at the end of August. Get on the wait list. You'll be the first to know and get the founder's discount of 50% off. All right, we are going to get started shortly. I am here with my pals, Grogu, and two types of Gudetamas. I'm here with my Mandalorian tumbler with my Tocino Dandelion Caramel Nut Tea. So good, refreshing, and helping me get started with my story on starving for love. Even though I wanted to talk about this, I was actually a little bit reticent because it's very personal. And it's a little bit embarrassing, to be honest with you. Throughout my whole life since puberty, or maybe even before puberty, that I can remember, I was in this state of needing to find romance, a love connection, a boyfriend, a partner, a husband. And for me, I was always on this desperate search of not being single. So when I was in high school, and I would say even before high school, when I was in middle school, I had a boyfriend, but I never had a gap between boyfriends or dating partners because I always felt something inside of me, like I needed to be with a guy. I needed to have somebody with me and doting on me and adoring me. And so I didn't, to be honest with you, I didn't. I was never single. Never, ever, never single. I think when I got divorced, I tallied up the amount of time that I had actually been single. And I think it was 6 months from the time I hit puberty, or maybe even before, until age 36 when I got my divorce. So in all of that time, I think I've been single like 6 months out of that entire time. And I don't know the reason why I had tallied that up, but I did. Even when I was going through my separation. Now the separation for me, it took a really long time because there were a lot of complications in it, which I'm not going to go into, but I was separated for a really long time before the divorce actually was final. So even when I was legally separated and living on my own, I had my own house, I'd even moved to a new area, I was again on this desperate search not to be single. And so I jumped into a relationship a few months after I had moved into my own house. Now, this was the first date that I had from a dating site. I didn't really play the field. This guy showed interest in me, and so I dove into another relationship. It was always this chase, this feeling of not wanting to be alone, this feeling that if I wasn't in a romantic relationship, that something was wrong with me, that something was seriously wrong with me. And so I had this notion that I couldn't be alone. I couldn't be single. I had to be in a relationship. I had to have somebody in my life. And I didn't realize that that was kind of abnormal. And the reason The reason it finally came to me was after that initial relationship broke up, like 4.5 years later, the one I got to immediately after my marriage, I did take some time. Now, it wasn't super mindful. I think I had jumped back in the dating pool like 1 month after that relationship broke up, but I started to be more mindful. And I was sad being single. I was anxious being single. It didn't feel right to me. I felt like I would never find the right person, or what if I don't find the right person? But I was starting to entertain the question that it might be okay to date around a little bit to get to what I really want. And it might be okay to be single until I find the relationship that I want and that I deserve. Now, one step into that was I did a seminar called Healing the Heart about 1 month before I met my next person in the next relationship. And I really began to reflect on this notion of jumping from relationship to relationship, from guy to guy, and not wanting that vacuum, not wanting to be single, not wanting to be in a space where I was alone or I didn't have someone in my life in a romantic notion. But I was really like graspy, if you will. Like, I can't think of a better word for it. I felt desperate in a way. I felt graspy in a way. I felt like it was something that was very bad to not have someone. It was something that was very bad to be single. Now, I'm sure there were many reasons for this from my upbringing, but I think one of the things was that I had really low self-esteem. And so for being with someone, even if they were like less than the desirable romantic partner, for me, being with someone kind of validated who I was as a person. It made me feel loved. It made me feel wanted. It made me feel needed. And so I would have rather had that set of feelings than the feeling of being alone. Because for me, being alone meant being unloved, which is not true, by the way. That's something I learned much, much, much later in the process. So when I went to that seminar, Healing the Heart, I had done a lot of self-work to heal the heart. But one thing I really hadn't looked at was my sense of self-worth, self-esteem, and getting to the place where I could be discerning. And so that was like the biggest problem with chasing love. That was the biggest problem with not wanting to be alone. And that was the biggest problem with needing to be in another relationship as soon as one ended. The problem was the lack of discernment. Because I learned that if my driving force was to be in another relationship, if my driving force was to not be alone, then pretty much any guy who showed interest was par for the course. Whether he was nice or not, whether he was healthy physically or mentally or not, whether he was a good person or not, those things really didn't matter to me. What mattered to me was, does he like me? Is he interested in me? Is he willing to commit to me? Really, those were my only criteria. Even though I had other criteria, if I really had to like whittle it down into how I chose, those were the reasons I chose. Is he interested? Does he want to be with me? Is he going to commit to me? Like, those are the real reasons. And so I found myself over and over and over again with romantic partners that wanted those things, but may have been less than desirable as human beings, where they didn't necessarily treat me right, or they were dealing with a whole host of emotional problems themselves. They had a lot of baggage they hadn't dealt with. They were maybe critical, they were depressed, they were anxious. And in the last case, where I had this epiphany, but I didn't understand it, was when I was dating the alcoholic person. So right after Healing the Heart, like right after that seminar, I met my person who was the alcoholic. Now, that doesn't mean that relationship was wrong. It meant that I didn't yet get the self-love part to be able to have proper discernment, to understand that if someone has an addiction, they're probably not the right partner for you, especially if they're in an active addiction, meaning it hasn't been treated. There hasn't been anything looked at. So I immediately jumped into a relationship with that person. And I had dated for about 6 months. I had been dating various people, but it was still the same sentiment, if you will. It was the sentiment of chasing. It was the sentiment of desperation. And it was this sentiment of absolutely positively needing to not be alone, needing to find someone at all costs, to not have that period of being alone. And so while I dated, I was always kind of like on the prowl for that one serious relationship that was going to stick with me, because I couldn't bear the thought of not having it. So in a way, that was kind of like an addiction, right? So about 6 months into that relationship, once I was realizing that this person was a bona fide alcoholic and there were some serious problems with that, I was seeing a therapist. Now, I had been seeing a therapist based on the last relationship that I had when it ended, and it really wasn't even for me. That therapist I had gotten for my son, who had gotten attached to that previous person's kids. So my son was like, I'm not going to therapy. So I ended up going to therapy. And while it didn't really get me to the root cause of my issues at the time, the lack of self-love, self-worth, self-esteem, that was keeping me on this desperate, crazy search to be in a relationship at all costs with a lack of discernment, she pointed out something, and I told her about how we met. And I said, like, it was really loving, it was open, and even when I met his son was like super open and really loving. And she looked at me and said, and it stunned me at the time because I didn't quite get it. She said, yeah, you guys met and fell in love because you were both starving for love. And I was like, what? I did not know what she meant at that time. I had no clue what she meant, but obviously it stuck with me. It obviously stuck with me because that was back in 2013. It is now 2026. So 13 years later, it has stuck with me. She said, you were both starving for love. Of course you fell in love with each other. And now I know what she meant. What she meant was, we both had low enough self-esteem. We both had low enough self-worth for various reasons, right? My reasons were not his reasons, and his reasons were certainly not my reasons. I was not an alcoholic. I was not an addict. I did not have those issues, but I did have the issues of not having proper discernment because of the desperation to be in a relationship and to be loved. And so when you come together, what I realized is when you come together with a romantic partner based on not wanting to be alone, wanting to fulfill the need to have a relationship because one just ended or ended shortly ago, wanting to be loved, needed, desired, wanting a committed relationship of someone, which is really security, right? Like someone who is not going to leave you. That's the idea, right? Like, don't leave me. But it's a desperate attempt at being loved. It's not coming from a place of wholeness. And it's certainly not coming from a place of self-love. So while that person really loved me and I really loved him, I'm certain of it, right? I'm not questioning that fact. I really do believe we loved each other. But the love only went so far because we couldn't see past our own lack of self-love, which opened the relationship up to a whole host of other problems, including things like jealousy and obsession or desperation, in the sense of, if the person didn't call you when they said they were going to call you, or didn't text you when they said they were going to text you, then there are these huge insecurities that arise because you are looking at the other person. In my case, it was that person. You're looking at the other person as your source of love. And so when they don't call you or text you on time, when they don't do what they say they're going to do at the time they say they're going to do that, but it's very common if you're in a relationship with an addict that they are not going to follow through at times. I would say more often than not, because when they're involved in their addiction, they lose track of time. They lose consciousness. Like, a lot of things happen. So you become very insecure. And that's what happened to me. So because we came together, yes, loving feelings, but we came together without discernment of what we truly desired, in the sense of, I want to be healthy and whole and happy, and I feel whole within myself. And if this person doesn't call me at the time they said but they call an hour later and they apologize, maybe something got in the way, I don't feel like my world is crumbling to the ground. And so when you don't have discernment because you don't have self-love, then you always feel like the other person is pulling the strings on your happiness, or pulling the strings on your ability to have love in your life. When I was in this position of starving for love, and truly, I didn't understand that statement till probably about 2024. I'll be real honest, because while I started on my self-love journey during that relationship, I didn't know that's what it was. And then when I was on my twin flame journey around 2019 is when I really started understanding self-love, but I still didn't understand the concept of not wanting the vacuum, or being desperate, or being in a state of chasing love. I didn't really get that, because I said, well, if I'm not actively doing anything to pursue the person, then how is that desperation, or how is that chasing? Well, it's the energy that you have, this angst, this inner angst. And so I believe that what that therapist was picking up on was not necessarily how I was behaving, but it was more my energy that was this desperate attempt to be in this toxic relationship with the alcoholic at that time, and back in 2013, that I wanted at all costs to be in that relationship, even though it was doomed from the start. Because when we both came into it, we were both starving for love. If you want to put it simply, both of our cups were on empty. Like, our cups were completely dried out, completely empty, and we were looking for love in each other. And that never works, because it becomes an obsession. It becomes clingy. It becomes like desperation. And also, you begin to accept unacceptable behavior if you're in that realm. And because you're accepting unacceptable behavior, you begin bargaining with yourself. And you're like, well, it's not that big of a deal if they lie from time to time. Or it's not that big of a deal if they come home really late because they were out at a bar, or they're out at a strip club, or whatever, right? We start to bargain ourselves away when we're starving for love. But I realized in 2024, after having pondered this for years, because if you think about it, between 2013 and 2024, that's still a big bucket of time. But I had been learning lessons and pondering it. And of course, I learned a whole lot of lessons on self-love through my twin flame journey, which I write about in 2 of my books, Twin Flame Romance and Twin Flame Union. But I had learned a whole lot about it. I just didn't have it click into place. And it was in 2024 when I started writing this book. I started writing this book in 2024, and that's when it had clicked into place. And let me tell you, like, having it click into place was a game changer, because I was no longer starving for love, because I had the experiential knowledge that I could fill myself with love. And I explain that all in the book, but I can fill myself with love through integration of my own inner power, body, mind, emotions, personality, ego, soul, spirit, I can fill myself with love, and I don't have to be so desperate that I'm willing to accept any types of friendships, that I'm willing to accept any types of family relationships, that I'm willing to accept any romantic relationship. And when I say that was a game changer, that was a game changer, because I began to treat myself like the person I want someone else to treat me. If that makes sense. I don't even know if that made sense, but I began to treat myself the way I wanted to be treated by someone else. I was no longer afraid of being alone, no longer afraid of not being in a relationship, no longer afraid of having that vacuum of whether it's time or in between dating or in between relationships. I didn't have this sense that my airway was cut off if I didn't receive love from somebody else. I was so free at that point. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't want healthy friendships, that I don't want a healthy relationship, that I don't want healthy family relationships. That doesn't mean that. Of course I do. But now I don't have to run to them and just choose anything and choose any friend and choose any romantic partner that's going to come my way. And I don't have to hold on to toxic family ties in the way that I had held on to them in the past. I can choose, I can pick, and I can choose. And it's very, very, very freeing to not be in that desperate space of starving for love. So I just wanted to share that with you, because I know that many of you out there are in a similar situation as I am for many reasons, right? Your reasons might be totally different from my reasons, but nonetheless, so many of you out there are feeling this pull, this desperation, this feeling of like, oh my God, I can't be alone anymore. I feel unloved. I feel like if I don't have a romantic partner who adores me, who loves me, who dotes on me, then I am just a piece of crap, right? Why don't people like me? And so when you have that energy, of course, you're going to repel the right people. You might attract in the wrong people, but you're going to repel the right people, because that energy of desperation attracts the energy of desperation. Just like I did with my alcoholic boyfriend. Now, I do not regret being in that relationship. That relationship taught me so much. And that person is a beautiful person. He is just dealing with, or had been dealing with, a lot of personal problems, but that doesn't make him a bad person. For me, as a healthy person, it just didn't make it the right fit, right? Once I realized I can't do toxic anymore, I can't do desperate anymore, I can't do that energy anymore. So that was my growing curve that took me on my journey to self-love even deeper. And I am inviting you to join this unconditionally self-love journey with me, because it is my mission and my purpose to teach others how to love themselves unconditionally, so that eventually you attract in the right relationships, the right friendships, the right family dynamics, and even the right jobs for you. Because everything is law of attraction, right? So if you have this desperate energy and you're needing to find a job, you might find a job that doesn't pay you enough, in which the company culture treats you terribly, and so on, right? So I hope this was helpful for this week. I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. Click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications, and thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. Thank you for sharing this video with others who are on a healing journey, self-love journey, working on themselves. I'm sure they will find it so valuable. I want to invite you to go to my website, michellefondinauthor.com. I've got a new VIP coaching program, Self-Love Mastery, and my Self-Love Mastery online course that's upcoming at the end of August. You can get on the wait list now. And I will see you in the next video.